Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review In Time. So, once you're done crying a river after your pizza delivers, you can go on and watch this movie conveniently on Tubi, Tubi. So, I enjoy this film. There might be some points where acting is kind of, but I enjoy this film. I just like the concept of it was just so fascinating. Instead of us getting money as a currency, we have time as a currency. And so we go on and we have a certain person at a certain time period of their life, all of a sudden the clock is ticking. And so there are certain time zones which lead to having certain time borders where when Will is to miraculously come into a decade's worth of time on his hands, Will is assigned to cross certain borders to place bets on his life. And I thought this movie, yeah, like there's like some goofy parts about it, but I just enjoyed it. I just really did. Uh, really just trying to break down this system, and instead of people just kind of dying off into the streets, why not just go on and just spread out this time evenly to where everyone is to be able to have a chance to live forever, or is to go on and have the possibility of people living longer. uh, so yeah, I really enjoyed that kind of idea. And to where it just like presented an interesting story. We also have certain guys like timekeepers who, uh, and like also this kind of like reminds me of like Loki in a way, or the show Loki. We have these timekeepers that come in and they're to be like this police force if somebody's trying to steal time or something like that. We also have these Minutemen come in that are kind of like the gangsters, uh, within this world, trying to just steal time from anybody if it seems that they are to have this uh, kind of outlandish amount of time on their hands, or hand in this instance. And so they try to steal it away from this person or kill that person, and because of what border or society that they are to be living in on. So with that said, let's just go into spoilers, or let's go into grading this movie. Let's go. I've already mentioned where it conveniently is. Grading. I would have to say that like the concept really wins me over, but the acting of it, like I would have to go on, and I would have to say because of concept alone, this is a it's a like a good movie, just kind of a good, like maybe like a an okay plus going into good maybe. Uh just because of the concept, just because it's a refreshing film, and like I love how they play around with it in this story. But yeah, like the concept of this really has to kind of like hold this movie together. And so it's just kind of fun to play around with this whole thing. And I think it would be honestly cool if they would have went on and had like a very much more like noir star, like noir kind of movie, because this does feel like that. But I wish like they could even went into further of just having us like have like a real just noir movie. Like if they had like a time period piece within this in time movie, that would be really interesting. Because maybe at some point like we couldn't have been bothered to like evolve past a certain time period, just because like when you live forever, I think a lot of things just no longer matter. And so I really don't understand like Like, why couldn't we have just had like a certain time period where we were just stuck where we were? That would have been interesting. But anyways, that's just me. So, so with that said, yeah, let's just go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers because I think at the end of the day, this movie's okay, or it's an okay film. So with that said, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. So, Will at the beginning of this film is to uh, be waking up for his day, and it seems that we come to find out that Rachel, who is his mother, is to look exactly the same age as Will. Hence, why we are to really just realize here that people at a certain time really don't age. And so, a lot of times, they are to stay at one age for a very long stretch of time until their time runs out for one reason or another. So, we have a woman like Rachel who, after she's to go on and pay off certain bills like electric and them living there and so on and so forth, Rachel at one point is to realize that she may need to borrow time from Will, uh, or otherwise she will eventually go on to uh, uh, die or run out of time. So Will has to meet Rachel at this bus stop to kind of give her more time. So, and Will is also doing some overtime on his work so he can get more time to give to his mother. So yeah, like it's a very like kind of slow beginning, but yeah, let's get into it. So we have Will that is to eventually go to a normal job, do his job, and it seems that prices on everything are starting to up. It seems that simply a thing like coffee is to cost more time than it was before. It was to cost like 4 minutes of someone's time. And so, Will, of course, is to be best friends with a guy named Boral. And so, Will goes on and is to go to work. And it seems that Will, when he's to get his time at the end of the day, it seems like his time's a little bit less than before. And he's like, well, what the is this? Because everything is to start to become um, more pricey, and it seems that people are kind of getting ripped off. So, as well as like things are all of a sudden doubling from what they were before, and so like now people are realizing that things are getting tighter. We have both Will and Boral who just kind of walk into their job realizing that someone had collapsed because they had run out of time. Noticing that they're having dead bodies just drop like flies because that's just happening here. So within this world. So we go on and we have both Will and Boral after a long day of work. They go to this bar. It seems that a guy named Henry is to stumble upon a century's worth of, or a decade's worth of time. So Henry, of course, is to be at this bar, and like Henry is buying all these drinks, flashing all of this time around, so to speak. So we have it where Will is to try to go on and do the right thing here, and it's to tell Henry, it's like, hey man, you should probably get out of here because anybody's gonna probably try to go on and like try to steal that time from you, and like you should go on and try to like get out of here. So all of a sudden Henry's like, meh, like I don't care, like I'm just gonna go on and buy all these drinks and possibly buy two women and get out of here. So all of a sudden we have a guy named Forstis, who's to show up here, and he's part of this Minuteman gang. And so Forrestus is to come in here and immediately find out that Henry is to have a nice watch, meaning that he has quite a bit of time on him, and Forrestus wants to steal this away from Henry. So Forrestus is wanting Henry to go on and have both of them do this game to see who is to eventually lose their time. So Henry is to say, like, well, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom before we go on and do anything. So Henry goes to the bathroom, starts barfing, and Will is to grab him and run out of this place, and is to have them both run off to where Will is trying to help Henry. And we have Boral that's telling Will, it's like, why are you helping this guy? And Will is just like, well, it's the right thing to do. And so we have Will go along with Henry. And at this point, I'm still in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, like, shouldn't Will be going on and helping out his mother? Because what was that whole thing before about her talking about that uh, she needed his assistance, but then like that comes like shortly thereafter this. So Will is to go on and be at this kind of abandoned building with Henry, talking things out. And so Henry had come into this time, and so Will and Henry are like talking about it, and Henry's mentioning that he feels that people shouldn't be able to live forever. That they should be able to like pick and choose like how long they really want to live and so on and so forth. So we have Henry taking sympathy on Will because he only really has 24 hours on his arm. And so because this guy is kind of living in the like the slum area where it's like the lowest income like border, so like Will can go on and continue to try to live uh like every 24 hours. And so we find out that Will is a lot faster in a lot of ways than any other person because he has to of course use his time wisely, to where Will at some point is to make this joke about like, hey, like you should definitely never go on and try to sleep in if you live a life like this. So Will and Henry, so they're talking, and so eventually they both fall asleep. Henry is to wake up before Will does, and so Henry is to give Will his time, and then Henry is to go on and be by this bridge, and he is to have like 10 seconds left. He dies, he falls over, and I would have thought that Will and Henry would have had like a lot more like significance between one another. It would have been interesting if we would have found out like Henry was Will's father, and we would have found that out like at some point before this. But like no, like Henry is just some random guy that just bizarrely gives Will this decade of time. So we have Forrestus that is talking to his Minutemen and saying that, well, hey, like they're either going to go after Henry and they're going to go after Will. Whoever is to have the time at the end of this, like they want to just steal this from these guys. So, and we also have the timekeepers that are to find out about this decade of time that had gone to Henry. So, like, even the timekeepers are kind of interested in uh, in Will eventually, and they're chasing after him also. So, because there's a whole like red flag thing that goes on as Will is to go from one border to jump a bunch of borders to have like seemingly a lot of time on his hands, and the timekeepers are like, whoa, like this seems weird. We even have Will who has to go on and tell this guy, it's like, well, hey, yeah, I got lost. So that's why I'm here. Sure, sure. So we then go on and have Will who is to have like a century's worth of time because I said a decade before, I meant a century, because we go on and we have Will, who is to give his best friend's Boral. He gives him a decade of time. So Will is to have a centuries of time, and so that's where I got confused here. So when Will is to meet up with his best friend and tell him that he has this time, Will is to give Boral 10 years, and Boral is to turn around and drink himself to death, and he still has those like 9 years still left. So like this guy has like a kid and a wife, and he just goes on and decides to drink himself to death while still having those 9 years just wasting away. You would have thought that maybe at some point like somebody like would have died and inherited it. Like the family would have inherited that time, but it doesn't weirdly work that way. Anyways, so Will is trying to hide the fact that he now has a century of time, roughly. So Will then is to mention that he wants to go and take his mom and like live it up to finally have them live in paradise like he's always dreamed. So Will is to try to go on and meet up with his mother Rachel to pick her up by this bus because I guess really just if you're like I guess poor in this world, you can't even afford like a car or anything like that. So, anyways, we go on, and Rachel is to take this bus, and come to find out the bus has increased or has doubled its time for you to go on and do this bus. And so Rachel is realizing it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, in my brain, I'm thinking the math, and we have a bus that takes 2 hours to get to Will. And this bus driver is asking for 2 hours. It's like, how is that a deal? how like you could like you could run there and get there at the same time. Um, but this girl only has an hour and a half left on her arm. So the guy is like, well, hey, like it's either you pay the 2 hours or you go on and you run. You run like the wind. So Rachel decides she's running to get to Will, and so Will goes on and is at this bus stop with flowers waiting for his mother, realizing that his mother isn't on the bus. So Will is now running to wherever his mother is, finds her, and by the time that he tries to grab her to give her time, she sadly dies. It's like, oh, so like, but still, like, if the bus drive is to take 2 hours, she has an hour and a half. I guess that would also really come in close, anyways, because when you're really thinking about it, like you're 30 minutes less. I don't know. It's just, and this is a bus, and anyways, uh, the math of it all, the math. So, anyways, Will is to be clutching his mother, and here's probably when we don't have like the best Justin Timberlake performance in this movie when he is like ma, like like, but it's hard. It's hard to try to be unique when you're just kind of mourning the loss of somebody, and like you can kind of scream in agony like Hugh Jackman did in in the Wolverine origin thing. And like, so Will is just now like, he has a vendetta, or he has like a will to go on and finally just take this whole world and just finally just be like, no, like I've had enough. Like I'm like tired of seeing like, because this guy is on the lowest totem pole here, so he's seeing a number of people just needlessly die, and he's like, you know what, I'm done with this. Like nobody should be just scraping together time. Like this is ridiculous. Like everybody should be able to get the chance to all live forever, as well as these like rich people that are kind of wiping their butts with time. Like things need to change. Change cents, dollars. Anyways, pushing on. So Will immediately goes on through all these borders, and so we have this kind of guy who is to be like a kind of an Uber driver or a taxi driver, some sort. Um, a guy who is to specifically drive people over borders and take away their time. So we go into this film and we have it consistently where like Will is going through all these borders and getting a massive chunk of time taken. Like through the last border, he ends up getting like a year of his life taken away. And Will's like, "Oh my god, like that took away a year." And he's like, "Well, yeah, that's what happens when you're going through this border." So all of a sudden, the timekeepers are like, "Hey, like, who is this random guy?" Because it doesn't seem to make sense that this guy is to come into 10 years of time or to come into a century of time. This doesn't make sense. So we have Will go on to immediately be in a place where he sticks out. We have some waitress that is giving Will food here, and she's immediately like, "Yeah, you're not from here, are you?" And Will's like, "Why do you say that?" And she's like, "With the way you eat so quickly." And like that's the thing where it's like if you have all the time in the world, you're gonna take your time. But with Will, like he can't break the fact that he is to kind of move a lot faster than everybody else around here. To where a lot of people go on and be very winded or whatever just because like they don't do everything as quickly as Will does because like it's a thing to have adapted to. Where eventually Sylvia is to not adapt well from what happens with her in this story. So, anyways, but we have Sylvia who's looking on at Will while she's eating. She's like, "Yeah, there's something about that guy. I don't know what it is, but there's just something about him." So, Will then turns around and is to buy a car and is to go to this casino, and we have Will who's asking this guy at this casino. He's like, "Well, hey, like, what is the limit that people can bet?" And the guy's like, "Well, you can bet anything. You can bet what you can bet your whole life." So Will's like, "Oh, okay." So we have Will who goes on and coincidentally meets with a guy named Philip, who is to be this very rich man where he can go on and just kind of throw uh, like years however he wants, because he of course is to have like a million years, like basically in a vault somewhere, that he can basically just live forever if that's really what he wanted to do. So because of course this guy is to go on and like own all of these number of banks, which are to have all of this time. And so like this guy is to just kind of throw like a decade to his daughter, just because, just as a celebration, for her eventually starting to tick away at her time. So Will is to meet up with Philip, and they are to try to gamble. And it seems that Philip is to have a pair of queens, but it seems that Will is to just have a better hand. So Will is to basically go all in for himself, and conveniently, he is to win this pot, and so he is to kind of double his time. And Philip is like, well, like, me kind of just throwing that out there, like, meh, like, oh well, but good for you. So all of a sudden, this opens Philip up to have Will come to this party that Philip is throwing, and maybe if they go on and they play another game together, maybe Philip can win back that time that he had given Will. So Willip is to Willip Willip Will is to go on to this party and is to then meet up with Sylvia, and because of course Philip is to introduce Will to all of his family, who are basically the same age as one another. Like the mother and the daughters are to look the like exact similar age. So, which I just thought was really fun. So Sylvia is to see Will again, and so it seems that they are to go and talk to one another. And while talking to one another, Will is to realize that Sylvia is to always have a bodyguard, and it seems that Will should have the same, because at some point somebody might like turn around and try to steal his time from him. So Will is like, I don't think I need a bodyguard, but I guess Sylvia needs two. So Will goes on and is to get Sylvia away from her bodyguards. And so Will and Sylvia go on to just skinny dip by this beach. And Sylvia's like, well, why would I want to go out there? And Will's like, seriously, if you had this like by your house like every single day, why wouldn't you? So Will goes out there because he's a very impulsive person, and so Sylvia is to really like that. And so Will and Sylvia go on and are to enjoy this time in the water together. And all of a sudden, this bodyguard is to be calling Sylvia back. So Will and Sylvia put back on their clothes or go back into of course, his place, and Philip is asking Will, it's like, have you seen my daughter? And then Sylvia just appears back with her guards and stuff like that. So all of a sudden, we have it where this whole party is to just stop. Because we have Raymond, who is to be this timekeeper, who is chasing after Will because there's something suspicious about him. So Raymond is to go on, or Leon? Raymond Leon. Really, in this part of casting, they just call him the timekeeper. So Leon here is to show up at this party and to want to like shut everything down, bring Will in and like take all of his time away except for 2 hours. So it's like, well, wait a minute, like, so even like when Will was to go on to the casino and win that time. Like, they just take everything away but 2 hours, I guess, to keep Will on a very short leash. So, because Will is to think that uh, that Will had killed this guy to take this time from him. And I'm like, wait a minute, why isn't, like, the Minutemen, like, why aren't they being investigated? Why aren't they being, like, arrested? Like, that would have been the obvious thing in this story, but I guess it is what it is. So Will is to go on and steal Sylvia, and so Sylvia is to have some time upon her wrist where Will is to only have 2 hours. So Will is to grab Sylvia and hold her hostage, hold her at gunpoint, to scramble her out of this place and have them both run off together. So Will is desperately asking Sylvia for time, and she's like, no, I'm not going to give you time. So, come to find out, while both of them are to, of course, run away together, they eventually get into a car accident because the Minutemen are to find out where they are. And so Fortis is to go and find Sylvia and take quite a bit of her time, to where it seems that both Will and both Sylvia are to go on and realize that they're going to run out of time. So we then have Will and Sylvia, who are desperately trying to figure out where it is that they can go on to find uh, time. So Sylvia and Will have to go to this pawn shop for Sylvia to sell her earrings so they can get 2 days worth of time. So Will and Sylvia are to save this time. So we also have it where Will is to call Philip to ask if Philip will go on and give 1,000 years to this place that is kind of offering time to people. So Will and Sylvia are to kind of wait it out to see if Philip goes on and is to give up this time. And Philip is contemplating really giving up that time to save his daughter. To where, like, Philip's wife is like, really? Like, you're contemplating this? Like, a guy who can go on and just throw away like this, like, time, like it's nobody's business, just playing around with it. So we have Sylvia, who realizes that her father won't go on and give up this time, and that's when we start to see that Sylvia is to start to kind of step away uh, from this family and is to more connect with Will, because she is to now to be in the same kind of, like, desperate for time approach that, like, Will has been going through all of his life. So Sylvia and Will are deciding that they want to try to figure out one way or another how to go on and, like, just kind of crush the system, or to eventually figure out how to give everybody time equally. So we have Sylvia, we have Will, that once they try to go back to Will's place, and Sylvia is to realize that he's wearing, or she's wearing, Will's mother's dress and stuff like that. So we find out that both of these characters are wanted people. Because Sylvia at some point is to shoot this timekeeper after talking with her father, and the the Leon is to see them uh, kind of talking on this phone, and so he tries to come after them, and we have Will and Sylvia who take his car, but Will is to give Leon a couple hours for him to be able to go off and find somebody that can help him. So Will and Sylvia are to go and find another car that is to be the guy that is to kind of drive people through borders. And we have, of course, where there's to be this prostitute in the back seat. And at one point, we have this same prostitute who was talking to Leon, saying, like, hey, like, I'll give you 10 minutes for an hour. To where it's like, knowing that this girl will probably get somebody in 10 minutes, but like that's what she's kind of offering. So Will is to take like everything but 24 hours from this girl, because he's like, yeah, like that'll teach you to go on and do all these things and try to use your feminine wilds. It's like, I'm just gonna give you 24 hours, because for Will, like 24 hours was always more than enough time. And in 24 hours, you can do a number of things to try um, to buy your time back. So Will and Sylvia commandeer this vehicle, and so what they eventually decide to do are to break into all these banks and try and steal all of this time. And once they do that, and it seems that there's no one really there to stop them, they start going on and like handing out these people that were to kind of give time away, like it was charity. They go on and they like give them time to just like, hey man, like since you've always kind of given up your time to a lot of other people, here, take this. So, which I thought was like really nice. So Will is to have like so much time now with Sylvia, and even to the point where Will is to give back Boral's wife the decade that she lost from her husband. So Will and Sylvia are to decide to need to have to up their game, because what they're doing is not good enough. It seems that like the good chunk of time that they have given people is not good enough, that it's not really changing the system, because prices will just go up for things, and so the escalation of things are just getting higher for like certain. So like there is no way to really beat this, and so they're like, well, like we would need like a big massive amount of time to really drastically force this world to change. And so Will is like, we would probably need like 1,000,000 hours. And Sylvia's like, yeah, like we probably would need 1,000,000 hours. So, and conveniently, Sylvia is to know exactly where that 1,000,000 hours is. So, Sylvia and Will go on to steal from her own father to get this 1,000,000 hours, to then have Will give this 1,000,000 hours to this girl to kind of spread it all around. As this one little girl was to ask Will for like, hey, you have 5 minutes? And so Will's like, hey, yeah, here's 5 minutes, little girl. So so we go on, and now they have like 1,000,000 hours, but eventually at some point we have Sylvia and we have Will, who again we have Leon who's chasing after them because of like them like basically stealing time, and Leon is realizing that there's $1 million off the board. And like, oh my god, like this is uh we also have Philip that is thinking is like, well, like you going and taking this $1 million, you're just like you're hurting people more than you're helping them. And Will's like, no, like when really thinking about it, like there's a bunch of rich people that can live forever, and like the poor people are just dying off. And so that's, I think, when like rich people, instead of just gambling their time away, they should go on and just kind of charitably like give a lot of their time just away to poor people, like the people that like don't have like a reasonable amount of time. Just like, hey man, like, hey, you don't have enough time, like here's some more. But again, everybody's like contemplating, it's like, well, like, gee golly, like, am I ever gonna get more time? Oh no, am I gonna die because like I'm feeding away certain time to these people? It's a slippery slope. So Will and Sylvia, they're going on and being chased by Leonard or Leon, and it gets to the point where like Will and Sylvia, it's kind of interesting when both of them are to think that like, well, Leon's gonna like stop before we will, and then he just keeps on going after them, and he's like, crap, like, because they supposedly have so much more time than Leon does, because Leon is to only get a certain amount of time, because of course Leon is to be a timekeeper, and so like if anybody tries to steal time from Leon, he doesn't have much either. So like his vehicle is to continue to feed him time so he can continue to do this job. So Will and Sylvia, they are to go on and be chased down by Leon, and they get to the point where like they make it to this border, and so Leon, by the time he gets to Will and Sylvia, his time accidentally runs out, and so then he dies, and so both Will and Sylvia are running to Leon's car, and they go on to just get 24 hours, and then they have to, like, Will has to run back to Sylvia to give her time so she can survive. So we also had the one moment where Will at some point is to be uh, met by these Minutemen, because at some point Will and Sylvia are to buy this whole entire hotel complex, and tell like the girl behind the counter, it's like, yeah, like I hope that your people that live here are gonna be like completely discreet. And they're like, oh yeah. So one guy is to go on and spot uh, that, of course, these two are living here, and so we have the Minuteman who's going and trying to find these snitches, and Fortis is to start killing people off if he doesn't give them information. And then one guy comes forward and he's like, well, hey, like, I saw these two people at this place. So the Minutemen go after them, and Fortis and Will are to play this game where they're kind of rotating their hands, and they're arm wrestling. So Will had talked to Sylvia, and I guess uh, in the past, Will's dad would be like this fighter, and it seems that Will would also go on and have his dad play all these like certain games and stuff like that. So it seems that Leon had known Will's dad like really well. So we have Will that is to tell Sylvia this trick, that Will is to kind of show that when Will's time is almost up, that's when the other player is to kind of look at his arm, and that's when Will can kind of take advantage of this game and drain the other person of all their time. So all of a sudden we have Will and Forrest who are playing this game, and so Forrest is with Will, and he is to, of course, almost drain all of Will's time. And then once Forrest looks down, Will is to kind of counter here and drain Forrest of all of his time. Plus, also, Will is to whip out this gun and start shooting all the other Minutemen, killing them off. And because Will is telling Forrest, is like, well, hey, like, what happens if I do win this game? Like, your friends are going to kill me anyways. And Forrest is like, well, we'll see about that. So Will ends up killing all of these guys and is to then go off to eventually meet up with Leon and have to like try to deal with him. So at the end of this story, we have both Will and both Sylvia who are to have like 24 hours between the two of them. So Will and Sylvia, after this moment, before they almost die, they then turn around and are to try to go on to find like bigger banks, like Fort Knox like banks, to then go after like the biggest amount of time to then be able to try to like change this system forever, to try to change it to what it to everyone can live forever, everyone can be immortal. And so with that said, I think that covers most of this movie. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that I did forget about. 'Cause I'm sure there probably is. Probably kind of certain details and stuff like that kind of eluded me or escaped me because there's a lot to talk about within this film. But other than that, yeah, I think I'm just going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.